My name is Evelyn, and I'm 65 years old. I've worked hard my entire life, raised a son on my own, and built a home filled with love and secondhand furniture. I never thought I'd end up being called a burden in that very same home. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day that doesn't warn you it's about to change your life. Megan, my daughter-in-law, was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up when she said it. I don't want a useless woman in my house while I'm pregnant. My son, Jason, was standing just behind her, arms crossed, face blank. He didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He just nodded, like it was the most natural thing in the world to agree with your wife about kicking your mother out. For a second, I thought I had misheard. I looked at Jason, waiting for the joke to end, for him to laugh and say, "Megan didn't mean it like that." But he only shrugged and told me maybe it was time I found a new place to live. Just like that. It's hard to explain what that moment did to me. It wasn't just the words. It was how easily they came, how casually they tossed me aside after everything I'd given. I'd sold my house to help them buy this one. I'd lived in their garage for the past 7 months. I paid rent, cooked meals, folded laundry, and kept the house clean. And I did it all with a smile because I believed that family took care of each other. But standing there, in the hallway of a house I helped pay for, I realized something I should have seen sooner. I wasn't family. I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. No, not even a guest. A temporary convenience. And now that Megan was expecting, I had become inconvenient. I remember feeling cold all over. Not from the air, but from something inside me pulling away, detaching like a broken thread in a worn-out sweater. Megan finally looked up at me. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. She said they needed the space for a nursery, that I'd be more comfortable somewhere with people my age. Jason mumbled something about senior communities and how they were really nice these days. That's when I knew. They weren't asking me to leave. They had already decided I was leaving. The conversation wasn't a request, it was a notification. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just stood there, feeling like I had been erased. I had poured everything into raising a son who now looked at me like I was a broken chair he didn't know what to do with. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to ask if he remembered the nights I worked double shifts so he could have lunch money, but I didn't say a word. Because what's the point of shouting into a room where no one's listening? I nodded. I said I'd be out by the weekend. Megan looked satisfied. Jason looked relieved. Neither of them saw the way my hands were shaking or the crack that had just split down the center of my heart. That's the thing about being discarded by your own family. It doesn't happen with yelling or slamming doors. It happens with silence, with indifference. It happens when people you love decide you're no longer useful. I stood in the garage that had been my home for nearly 7 months and looked around at the small stack of boxes. Everything I owned now fit into 3 plastic bins and a suitcase. After 65 years of living, raising a child, surviving the loss of my husband, and working 2 jobs to keep food on the table, this was what I had left. I sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting on a worn photo album. Jason was barely 4 in the picture on the cover, sitting in my lap with jelly on his face, smiling like the world belonged to him. And in many ways, it did. I had given it to him piece by piece, paycheck by paycheck. When his father left, I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I went back to work 3 weeks after the divorce, took a second job on weekends, and skipped every vacation for 12 years. I made sure Jason had birthday parties, braces, and books for school. I clipped coupons until my hands cramped. I taught myself how to fix a leaky sink and patch drywall because we couldn't afford a handyman. He never went without, not once. I made sure of it. I didn't care that I wore thrift store coats or packed bologna sandwiches for dinner. I cared that he felt safe, supported, and never knew how close we were to the edge. And now, he looked at me like I was clutter, something to be cleared out so the baby could have a nursery. Maybe I should have seen it coming. Megan had never liked sharing space. She'd sigh when I made coffee too early, complain when I fold laundry wrong. I thought it was just stress from the pregnancy. But now I think she saw me as competition. Another woman in the house with a history Jason didn't have with her. I opened a box and started packing my books. Every motion felt heavier than the one before. But underneath the hurt, something else had started to grow. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was clarity. The kind that sneaks in when the fog of loyalty starts to lift. They had forgotten who helped them. Not just with money, but with time, with love, with years they could never repay. And I had forgotten something, too. I had forgotten how to protect my own dignity. As I taped the last box shut, I realized this wasn't the end of something. It was the start of something I hadn't done in a long time. I was going to take care of myself, not out of spite, but because I deserved better than to be treated like a temporary solution. They thought they were pushing me out. But what they didn't realize was that they were setting me free. And once I walked out that door, I was never going to shrink myself to fit into their version of family again. The apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. A small one-bedroom on the second floor of a brick building just outside downtown, with old hardwood floors and a kitchen that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The first night I slept there, I didn't dream, and that felt like peace. I didn't miss the garage. I didn't miss the careful steps, or holding my breath when Megan stomped through the house. I made myself tea, played my old records, and remembered what it felt like to take up space without apology. A few days after I moved in, I got a call from Dean Carter. He was a friend of a friend, someone I'd met once at a community fundraiser years ago. He'd remembered I used to help my late husband with home repairs and minor renovations, said he was expanding his property development business and looking for someone who knew the area and had a good eye for detail. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask if I was qualified. I just said yes. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed a door to open. Dean wasn't offering me a handout. He was offering me a chance to be useful on my own terms. I hung up the phone and stood in the middle of my little living room, the light from the window falling across my unpacked boxes. I wasn't lost. I wasn't abandoned. I was rebuilding. Quietly. Steadily. And this time, I wasn't doing it to earn anyone's love. I was doing it because I had finally remembered how to love myself. Dean and I met over coffee at a quiet cafe just a few blocks from my new apartment. He brought a tablet loaded with property maps, zoning notes, and redevelopment plans. I sipped my drink, nodding as he talked through his vision of transforming older neighborhoods into fresh, livable spaces. When he asked if I knew of any houses that might be ideal targets, I paused just long enough to seem thoughtful. "There's one on Glenridge Avenue," I said. "Nice location, recently renovated garage space, but I doubt the conversion went through proper permits." That kind of oversight tends to complicate things during inspection. Dean raised an eyebrow, tapping a note into his tablet. I told him the house belonged to a young couple who were already financially stretched, barely managing the basics, let alone retroactive code fixes. From what I observed, they probably wouldn't survive the added cost of legal compliance. I didn't give names. I didn't need to. The address was enough. He understood exactly what I meant, and I kept my tone even, detached. I wasn't lying. I wasn't pushing. I was simply presenting a piece of information that happened to be true. After our meeting, I walked home slowly, letting the breeze cool my face. I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was simply done carrying people who couldn't see my worth. Let the paperwork speak. Let the permits catch up. Let the system do what it does best. I had given everything I had, and now I was giving nothing. If they had treated me like furniture to be moved aside, they were about to learn what happened when the foundation quietly shifted beneath their feet. The driveway felt smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the crisp white car parked at an angle. Or maybe it was just time shrinking the space between who I used to be and who I was now. Dean stepped ahead of me, clipboard in hand, business card ready, every movement calm and deliberate. Jason answered the door, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and the same confused expression I'd seen when he was 8, and broke a window. He blinked twice before his eyes settled on me. For a second, he didn't speak. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, as if his brain was struggling to accept what it saw. Dean extended his hand and introduced himself, smoothly launching into the reason for our visit. I stood just behind him, not saying a word. Jason's eyes darted back and forth between us, trying to piece together a puzzle that had no instructions. Megan appeared in the hallway, one hand resting on her stomach, the other holding a phone she clearly forgot how to use. Her face went pale when she saw me. She didn't even bother hiding it. That reaction alone was worth every silent hour I spent planning this. Dean explained that we were doing a preliminary property evaluation and that we had an interest in acquiring homes in the area. Megan didn't speak. She just stared. I gave her a polite nod, like you would to someone you once passed in an elevator. Jason stepped aside and mumbled something about coming in. I walked past them with the kind of composure you earn, not borrow. No shaking hands. No apologies. No pretending this was anything less than a turning point. Inside, I took in the space like I'd never seen it before. Same couch, same rug, but the power had shifted. This wasn't my home anymore. It was my opportunity. And I wasn't the one on the edge of losing something. They were. Dean laid the papers across the coffee table like a magician revealing his final trick. The offer was direct. No frills. $450,000. Cash. 30-day closing. Jason leaned forward, brow furrowed, mouth slightly open like he was trying to taste the numbers and couldn't quite believe the flavor. Megan didn't move. Her hand stayed resting on her belly, her eyes locked on Dean's. She looked calm, but I could see the tremor in her thumb as it tapped against her leg. Dean kept speaking, outlining the plan for redevelopment, the infrastructure improvements already approved by the city, and the construction timeline. Then came the warning. The garage conversion had likely been done without permits, which would pose serious compliance issues during the city's inspection phase. If the city stepped in, they'd be forced to bring the space up to code, costing thousands and possibly leading to red tags. Megan's mouth dropped open before she snapped it shut again. Jason asked how long they had to decide. Dean gave them until Friday. That was 4 days. 4 days to either accept the offer or face months of construction chaos, permit violations, and the very real risk of legal entanglements. I watched the panic start to crawl across their faces like shadows stretching at sunset. Jason glanced at me, searching for something. Reassurance. Support. A sign that this was all a misunderstanding. I gave him none of it. My expression stayed polite, professional, detached. Megan stood up suddenly and said they needed time to talk. Dean nodded and handed over his card. He said we'd follow up soon. I followed him to the door, pausing only once to look back. This was the same living room where I had once been told I was a burden. Now, it was the room where they realized I'd never needed them as much as they had needed me. Jason called later that evening. His voice cracked around the edges, like someone trying to hold broken glass in bare hands. He asked if it was true, if I had known about the permits, and said nothing on purpose. I told him I had known. I had been planning to fix it before I left. I had lined up a contractor, priced the materials, and even pre-filled the paperwork. It was supposed to be my gift to them, a way to say goodbye with something solid and useful, something that would last longer than a casserole dish or polite thank you. There was silence on the line. I could hear Megan in the background asking what I said. Jason didn't answer her. He asked me why I didn't follow through. I reminded him I wasn't invited to stay long enough. You told me to go. So I did. The repairs were left with me. He didn't respond right away. When he did, he whispered that they didn't know, that they hadn't thought it through, that Megan had been overwhelmed, and he'd just gone along with it. I told him that was the problem. They hadn't thought at all. Not about the consequences. Not about me. Not about what love is supposed to look like when it's tested. I heard the weight land. Right there in his silence. They hadn't just lost free labor or financial help. They had lost the one person who had been trying to protect them before they even knew they needed protecting. And now, all they had left was a list of regrets and a closing deadline. I hung up gently, not out of anger, but out of mourning. You only get so many chances to show someone what they mean to you. They had wasted theirs. They showed up the next morning, unannounced. Jason had dark circles under his eyes, and Megan looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her voice was soft when she spoke, saying they were sorry, that they hadn't meant to hurt me, that everything had spiraled out of control. I stood in the doorway, not moving, not inviting them in. I listened, because I owed them that, but I didn't reach for comfort. Apologies are cheap when they only show up after the consequences do. Jason said they hadn't realized how much I had done for them until it was gone. Megan nodded, eyes glassy, saying they missed me. I told them that missing someone doesn't erase the choice to discard them. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. They had made their decision when I became inconvenient. Now that reality had pushed back, regret wasn't enough. Jason asked what they could do to fix it. I said they couldn't. Respect doesn't grow from guilt. It grows from values you choose when no one's watching. Megan reached for my hand, but I stepped back. Not to punish her, just to remind her that I had the right to space too. I had earned that right, the moment they chose comfort over character. As they stood there, unsure of what to say next, I felt something shift. I wasn't the one seeking acceptance anymore. I wasn't asking to be seen. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for love to be proven. I was setting the terms. And that, more than any apology, was what I had needed all along. The call came just before noon. Dean sounded tight, like he was holding something back. Megan's father had filed a formal complaint with the city, accusing Hudson Properties of using intimidation tactics to force sales. It was absurd, but serious enough to trigger an investigation. Within 24 hours, I got my own call. A city compliance officer wanted to schedule an interview. She said it was routine, but her tone told me they were digging for something more. I showed up in a clean blazer and flats that didn't pinch. Sat across from a woman half my age who had a pen sharper than her smile. She asked about my relationship to the developers, the property, and the people who lived there. I answered every question, calm and measured, no trace of hesitation. I told her the truth. I had lived in that house. I had helped pay for it. I had been asked to leave without warning. Later, I was offered a consulting role on a neighborhood project already in motion. The facts didn't need emotion to be compelling. She asked if I'd suggested my son's house out of spite. I looked her straight in the eye and said no. I didn't recommend it to hurt anyone. I simply stopped protecting people who had made it clear they didn't care what happened to me. That was the line I held on to. Not out of anger, but clarity. I hadn't launched any campaign. I hadn't set anyone up. I had removed myself from a toxic dynamic and let the pieces fall where they naturally would. Megan's family thought they were defending their daughter. Maybe they believed I was being cruel, but cruelty would have been letting Jason and Megan walk into legal trouble without ever warning them. I had tried to help them. They had slammed the door in my face. So, no, this wasn't revenge. It was the quiet moment when a woman finally stopped setting herself on fire to keep everyone else warm, and watches, in silence, as those who took her for granted begin to feel the cold. The city cleared me after a week of questions and file reviews. No coercion, no wrongdoing, just a woman who had followed the rules, while everyone else scrambled to clean up the mess they'd ignored for too long. Jason and Megan sold the house to Dean's firm. They walked away with enough to buy something smaller, something they could afford without help. The day they moved, I saw the listing disappear online, and for the first time, I didn't feel anything at all. A month later, Megan gave birth to a baby girl. Jason texted me a photo and said they'd named her Evelyn. I stared at the screen for a long time before placing the phone face down on the table. I didn't cry. I didn't rush to the hospital, but I did send a card and a soft yellow blanket I'd been crocheting for months without knowing why. A small gesture, not a grand reconciliation. They sent back a thank you. Short, awkward, but real. And for now, that was enough. I wasn't ready to forget what had happened, but I also wasn't interested in carrying its weight forever. Sometimes closure doesn't arrive with a dramatic apology or a perfect ending. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the shape of a new name, whispered into a delivery room. A second chance, wrapped in a newborn's cry. It didn't erase the past, but it opened a door. And maybe, just maybe, we could learn how to walk through it without dragging all the broken pieces behind us. It took time, months in fact, before I saw Jason and Megan again. Not because I held a grudge, but because I needed to understand who I was without them defining me. When we did meet, it wasn't at their place or mine. It was neutral ground, a quiet diner off the freeway where no one had the upper hand. We talked, cautiously at first, then with something closer to honesty. They didn't ask me to move back in. I didn't offer help. But they listened when I spoke. And they didn't flinch when I held them accountable. That was new. That was enough. Our relationship now has edges where it used to have obligations. There's space between us, but it's respected, not avoided. I don't show up to be useful, I show up to be present. And when I leave, they say thank you. Not just out of manners, but out of recognition. They see me now, not as backup or burden, but as a person who matters, even when she isn't fixing something. Little Evelyn is growing fast. She calls me grandma in a way that makes the past sting a little less. She doesn't know what happened before her. She just knows. I make her smile. That's what healing looks like. Not forgetting, not pretending, just choosing every day to build something better than what was broken. Family isn't about sacrifice without limits. It's about love that includes respect. I don't live in their house anymore, but I do live in their lives. On my own terms. And for the first time in years, that's more than enough.